In our previous video, we created a new role under our IAM account, which will basically combine the tasks under our cluster with Secrets Manager. It was able to make a connection between the Secrets Manager and the task, and this task would be utilized by the cluster. So after making that connection, after attaching those respective policies, what we would focus on now is basically building the cluster and the respective task definition. So just go to your console and search for Elastic Container Service, that is ECS. Just click on that. I already have it open here. So under clusters, just go on the left and click on clusters and click on create cluster. After you do that, you need to give it a name. So let's just name it ECS Fargate Cluster. And under infrastructure, we will be making use of AWS Fargate. Let me explain that what's happening behind the scenes. Usually, when we build machine learning applications or any application in general, as if you expose that application to your, let's say, friends or relatives or anyone in the company, that person may be able to access your application. If you expose the same application to any other user, he or she may also be able to do that. But once you expose his application to everyone worldwide and everyone tries to access your application at the same time, that is when things start to break down and like people's request to process their respective text in a summary format might be added in a queue. So your application will not work simultaneously for everyone, and that is why we need to make sure that every application you develop is actually scaled out. It's just like Amazon. Like everyone in the world can actually access Amazon at the same time and make orders for whatever product they need. Everyone can actually access Netflix and watch the same content at the same time without worrying about the fact that these applications may not work for them for the next 30 minutes. So that is why we have to scale out our applications. So if we have to scale out our applications, we need to process data. That is, in this case, it's actually our text. And if we have to process that text, we need a computer with a CPU and a memory. So as the workload on our application increases, that is, as we have more users processing, like using our application, we need to make sure that we add more computers or more CPUs and more memory to our application. We could either do that manually by ourselves using Amazon EC2, or we can let AWS handle it for us. So if you are familiar with Kubernetes, or if not, don't worry about it. Just like Kubernetes, we basically, in this case, we have built a Docker image, and keeping that Docker image, we can scale it out. That is, we could add more computers, which will use that same Docker image as the workload increases. And all of this would be handled by AWS on our behalf. So that is why we're using AWS Fargate. But there are other deployment strategies which are also available, like Kubernetes or EC2, which we will be covering in subsequent courses. But for now, since we want to basically introduce ourselves to the world of scaling out applications, like scaling out LLM powered applications, we'll basically go ahead with AWS Fargate. With all other options, that is monitoring your container and tags, we'll just keep them as default. We can enable this service, but the only thing is like this comes at a cost. So even running AWS ECS would be like an additional cost to you guys. That is why I recommend that we create a free tier. So without further ado, we have given a name ECS Fargate cluster. We have selected AWS Fargate and we'll just create the cluster. So after the cluster, we initiated a creation of that cluster. The cluster is being created. So now what we need to do is basically go to our task definitions. Under tasks, the cluster has been created. So under task definitions, what we need to do is basically create a new task. So let's just go, and there are two options here. Just click on the first one and we need to give it a name. Let's say ECS. I'm going to give it the name Fargate task and that Fargate cluster. My cluster was ECS Fargate cluster. So my task, let's give it a similar name, ECS Fargate task. And that's the name I'm giving. Again, under launch type, I'm going to use AWS Fargate to make it consistent with the cluster. Under operating system, now this is where things are important. If you remember, when we actually build our Docker image, that is when we were building the Docker image, let me just clear this out. And if I look at the commands which I used to build this image, Docker build X, yeah. So Docker build build a platform tag was Linux/ARM64. This is the architecture in the OS I was using to build my Docker image. So when I come to the task definition, I have a similar option. That is exactly what I'll be using here. And this is just to make sure that I give my Docker container a similar environment as I was giving it when I built it on my local system. So that's the Linux operating system and the architecture I'm going to use. Now comes the infrastructure part. Since now let's just go back to our ECR, that is Elastic Container Registry. Now I want you to follow back on the discussion which we had when we were looking at the Docker images size. Our container image size was only 476 MB, but let's say if the size was much larger, let's say it was in GBs. So what you will do is basically increase the number of CPUs to hold that respective image and increase the overall memory. But we're just going to go with one CPU for now and 3 GB of memory. 3 GB should it would be very easy to accommodate 476 MB of memory. So we'll just choose these options. But if the image size were larger, you will choose a different option. Now for task execution role, this is where we will attach the task which we have created, that is ECS task execution role secret, to our task under cluster. And for task role, you just go ahead and click that again. Once that is done, now comes the part where we attach the Docker container to our image. So I want you to go back to your ECR, and here I want you to type the name, let's say container-1, the same name which is given here. For image URI, you are basically going to attach this particular URI, that is LangChain Streamlit, or any other name you may have given to your repository. Just copy this and paste it here. Once that is done, we know that if we refer back to our application and the Docker file, the application was running on port number 8501. So we will change this to 8501 and we go down. So now comes the part where we attach our secrets manager under environment variable. So just click on this, and for key, I want you to type in OpenAI key. So let's just search for secrets manager, and let me just close this. Just click on this. For secrets manager, I want you to type the key name, could be OpenAI underscore key, the same name you have given here, or it could be anything. But what really matters is the secret. So just copy this secret, go back to this and paste it here. Once that is done, very important, change this part from value to value from. Okay, once that is done, we are not basically referring to a file. We are directly feeding the values ourselves. That is, there's an option for adding environment file, but we don't need a file as such. All we need is refer the secrets manager from this particular ARN, that is Amazon resource name. So then we scroll down. We have these options for monitoring our task under CloudWatch. So all we would do is basically click on add. We'll be adding another collection log to our this list. So just click on this. Just lay open key log and let's name it to test. We will again paste our ARN, that is this ARN from here, and we just paste it here. Very important, again, changes value to value from. That is, we want to test our OpenAI's secrets manager. That is are we able to fetch it from secrets manager from this ARN? And since this is not a direct value, but actually a reference to our secret value, we need to change this value from value to value from. So once that is, value from, we won't be doing and making any changes to these values. These are all optional. They are all by default. We'll just keep the values as same. We already specified a storage amount, and we won't be adding any monitoring because that would come at an additional cost. So we'll just go ahead and create the task. So the task has been successfully created, and we can see that here. Okay, the next thing what we need to do is basically deploy the task, which we will do in the next video. So I'll see you in the next video now.